Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: are China, Russia, and North Korea planning to challenge the U.S.? President Trump thinks so. He sent a warning as they watch Chinese troops march in Beijing. And how does Taiwan view the situation? An expert weighs in.
Its real purpose is to erase the very fact of the Republic of China's existence.
Caught on a hot mic, Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke on the possibility of living up to 150 years through organ transplants. North Korea's Kim Jong listened in. And in another move showing their growing partnership, Russia says it wants to help China surpass the U.S. as the world's top nuclear power producer. And a look back at history. During World War II, many U.S. troops died in China fighting for the country's freedom. The U.S. provided billions in aid to China, helping the Nationalists fight off Japan. So how does that compare to China's military parade narrative? We take a closer look. And the House shows bipartisan support for cracking down on Chinese-produced fentanyl. An unprecedented moment sounding alarms to the West. The leaders of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are standing together in public for the first time as the Chinese regime reviews its military power. And President Trump setting his response from Washington, warning against any conspiracy against the U.S. On a Truth Social post Tuesday, President Trump said, quote, "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong as you conspire against the United States of America." The Kremlin responded the next day, saying Putin was not conspiring with China and North Korea against the United States. China's military parade is being held to celebrate the country's victory over Japan in World War II. Today's Taiwanese government, the Republic of China, was the legitimate Chinese government back then, not the Chinese Communist Party. Across the strait, Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te paid respects to the ones who fought in the Sino-Japanese War. He stressed that Taiwanese people love peace and will always uphold freedom and democracy. He added that they would not celebrate peace with the barrel of a gun. Analysts say that Beijing's military event holds a bigger political meaning. Its goal is to give authoritarian countries more confidence to challenge the West. Another Taiwanese expert says there might be more to it.
This so-called September 3rd parade by the CCP carries more political symbolism than military significance, because its real purpose is to erase the very fact of the Republic of China's existence.
The CCP claims Taiwan as its own, despite never having ruled it. As Beijing ramps up its military aggression towards the island, what can Taiwan do to defend itself?
Following NATO standards, Taiwan's defense budget next year will rise to about $28.8 billion. The second goal is to reach 5% of GDP by 2030. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense is making rapid adjustments in policy and strategy, channeling resources into asymmetric capabilities. The core of asymmetric warfare lies in cost-effectiveness, deploying low-cost, high-efficiency weapons. This includes various unmanned systems and precision-guided munitions. Although Taiwan's defense production is relatively small in scale, the battlefield environment works in its favors. If resources are invested in the right areas, they can act as a strategic lever and deliver outsized results.
Europe is also closely watching. The EU's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas called the three countries plus Iran an autocratic alliance. She said this isn't just anti-Western posturing, it's a direct challenge to the rules-based international system. The message comes as the EU reported that its defense spending last year rose nearly 20%, surpassing both China and Russia. A hot mic picked up Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin talking about longevity. They spoke on the possibility of living up to 150 years due to advancements in biotechnology and the ongoing organ transplants happening in China. The exchange happened as the two walked shoulder to shoulder at a massive military parade in Beijing on Wednesday.
代表发展，人类的器官会不断的移植，甚至越活越年轻，甚至会长生不老。预测呢，本世纪呢，可能未来可以活到150岁。也不能说是说人为的。
Putin and Xi were walking toward the Tiananmen rostrum. where they viewed the parade. The moment was live streamed on both Chinese state media and international media. Putin later confirmed to reporters that he indeed discussed longevity with Xi. North Korean regime leader Kim Jong-un was smiling and looking in the direction of Putin and Xi, but it was not clear if the conversation was being translated for him. Human rights groups have found that the Chinese Communist regime has been forcibly harvesting human organs from live prisoners of conscience on a wide scale for 2 decades. The organs were sold for profit to those needing transplants, including foreign visitors. Victims include Falun Gong practitioners and ethnic and religious minorities. Following the news of Putin and Xi Jinping's discussion on organ transplants and immortality, House Speaker Mike Johnson responded to a question raised by NTD this morning.
So, Melina with NTD, thank you for answering the question. So, at China's military parade today, China's Xi and Russia's Putin were heard on a hot mic discussing organ transplantation and its immortality. We know that China has continuously harvested organs by prisoners of conscience. What's your initial reaction to them being heard discussing such a thing, and how you all in the House are lobbying the Senate to pass the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act?
Yeah, I will tell you that we've heard some horrific stories of these organ transplants and all of this in China, that they take it from unwilling donors, okay, to put it mildly. And the fact that they were caught on a hot mic, first I've heard of that, is very telling. It tells you what their worldview is in contrast to ours. Speaking of evil. We've heard of, terrible stories. I've heard terrible stories of the Uyghurs, for example, this persecuted religious minority that they're using to harvest organs from. I mean, look, I've not seen the evidence of that, but if the leaders are talking about it, it should alarm us. The United States, we're going to stand for morality and ethics, and we're going to stand against that. There's legislation, as you know, that would address it, and we might need to put that at the top of the priority list if that's what's happening. So that's news to me.
Earlier this year, Congress passed the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act in a landslide vote of 406-1. The bill aims to punish anyone involved in forced organ harvesting, including Chinese doctors and officials. It's now waiting for Senate approval before it can become law. Russian President Vladimir Putin says his country's next major pipeline project could be a win for China. According to Putin on Wednesday, the proposed Power of Siberia 2 pipeline would provide Beijing with cheaper natural gas.
These are mutually beneficial agreements implemented strictly on market principles, specifically those prevailing in this region. Moreover, the price of this product is determined not by current market rates, but by a predefined formula.
Russia and China struck a massive gas deal on Tuesday, but they have yet to agree on pricing. The U.S. and other Western countries have been pressuring Beijing to distance itself from supporting Russia's economy. A large portion of Russia's energy revenue goes toward funding its war in Ukraine. Also on Wednesday, Russia said it wants to help China surpass the U.S. as the world's top nuclear power producer. Right now, China generates roughly half the nuclear energy of the U.S. But Beijing is racing to build dozens of new reactors. Russia's state nuclear cooperation chief says Moscow is already helping China reach that goal of surpassing Washington. Putin also thanked North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un for sending troops to fight in Ukraine. Earlier, South Korean assessments found that North Korea has sent around 15,000 troops to Russia since last year. President Trump also reminded China that many U.S. troops died in China fighting for the country's freedom during World War II. According to history figures, the U.S. provided $3 billion in aid for China. On top of that, Washington supplied weapons, aircraft, fuel, and food to help the nationalist government. At the time, China was ruled under the Nationalists, or the Kuomintang Party. They carried the fight against Japan during World War II. While China emerged victorious in pushing back Japan's invasion, the war left the nation deeply weakened. The communist forces took advantage of this by launching a civil war that eventually forced the Nationalists to retreat to Taiwan. Now, as Beijing stages a massive military parade to mark the war's end, critics argue the Communist Party is rewriting history to portray itself as the hero. We spoke with Gregory Copley, president of the International Strategic Studies Association, about what China hopes to achieve with this parade. Gregory Copley, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Wonderful to be with you, Tiffany.
Now, China is going to have a massive military parade to commemorate the 80 years since the end of World War II. But it's a bit interesting. It seems like there's a battle of narratives, if you will, because last I checked, the Communist Party wasn't in power during World War II. So what is the history here? Why have the parade and not really touch on the U.S. involvement in defeating, at the time, Japan?
Well, the parade is strictly a propaganda piece, a piece of theatre for the Communist Party of China. It's nothing to do with the reality of World War II. It's about the Communist Party trying to gain legitimacy as a great world power historically, when, of course, the People's Republic of China and the Communist Party of China literally have nothing to do with China's enduring history. It was, as you point out, the nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek, which was fighting Japan through World War II and before World War II began, in fact. And at that stage, the nationalist government was also fighting the communist forces and warlords in mainland China. And that's basically where it stopped, because the communist forces, the People's Liberation Army as they became, really was about defeating the nationalists, not about defeating the Japanese. And it used the fact that the legitimate Japanese government, the nationalists of the Republic of China, were fully engaged in fighting Japan. And so the communists were free, in a sense, to fight the nationalists without having to worry about the Japanese. You could argue that the Communist Party of China was absolutely complicit with Japan in World War II, given that they used the Japanese tying down the nationalist forces as an excuse to gain power.
I want to dig into that a bit, because there's a lot, as you mentioned, you know, the communist was a rising power at the time. It wasn't yet in power. But on that point, why didn't the U.S. at the time maybe help the nationalists stem the communist rising? We did give them a lot of aid. I think it was about $3 billion, but it wasn't much in terms of military. So talk to us about the history there.
Well, the U.S. was, in fact, preoccupied with fighting Japan in other theaters, along with, and this is very important to stress, it wasn't just the United States, along with the Allied powers, the Commonwealth and Britain and the like, fighting in Burma and Southeast Asia, and then fighting in the Pacific. In fact, the United States could not have done the job against Japan that it did if it wasn't allied with the support of Commonwealth states, particularly Australia, providing them with a land base to go into the Northeastern Asian situation. So essentially, the communist forces at that stage, as I say, were not fighting the Japanese, and the United States was going along its traditional path of supporting a unified China. Its policy, which led it to war against Japan in 1942, the plan at that stage was that the United States wished to guarantee the territorial integrity of China. China in the classical geopolitical sense, not China in the sense of the People's Republic of China. And as a result, US policy always, if you like, favored that territorial integrity of China. And when it became apparent that the nationalists were being forced out of control of the mainland and were forced to Taiwan and several other islands in the South China Sea and off the mainland coast, the US policy became one of support, or tacit support, or at least not opposition to the creation of the People's Republic of China. This has always been the big fault in US Asian policy. It tended to support the territorial integrity of China as it saw it, and forced that approach on the League of Nations at the time. Instead of thinking about, well, why is the territorial integrity of China critical to the United States? It may be critical to China, but not to the United States necessarily. And why didn't the US attempt to support true allies in the region? Let's face it, China, over the past few thousand years, has changed its area, at its borders, so many times that we can't even say what the territorial integrity of China should be. We need to really rethink what US and Western interests are in what's now called China and the region, and not fixate on, if you like, ancient misconceptions about the situation.
Lawmakers in the House are taking aim at the fentanyl crisis in the U.S. Nearly all the members voted in favor of cracking down on Chinese-produced fentanyl on Tuesday. NTD's congressional correspondent Melina Weisskopf spoke with Stephania Cox earlier with the latest updates.
So this bill would place sanctions on Chinese producers of synthetic opioids and opioid precursors. Precursors refer to chemicals used to make fentanyl. The bill would also hold accountable those who refuse to cooperate with U.S. counter-narcotics efforts to detect or prevent opioid trafficking. Now remember, Steph, China technically banned the export of fentanyl to the U.S. in 2019, but it still makes its way in illegally, mainly through Mexico. The bill's sponsor described the issue as the greatest challenge facing America today. Here's the sponsor, Andy Barr.
In addition, the Select Committee found that the CCP gave monetary grants and awards to companies openly trafficking illicit fentanyl materials and other synthetic narcotics. There are even examples of some of these companies enjoying site visits from provincial PRC government officials who complimented them for their impact on the provincial economy. The CCP holds an ownership interest in several PRC companies tied to drug trafficking.
Now, like you mentioned, Steph, the bill passed with overwhelming support of both Republicans and Democrats. A similar bill passed the House during the Democrat-controlled Senate, but senators didn't take it up at the time, so ultimately it did not make its way to the White House, Steph.
Yeah, Melina, so this bill actually comes after the Trump administration last week called for banks to monitor Chinese money laundering. And that's also related to the fentanyl trafficking. Could you dig into that for us?
Yeah, exactly. The Treasury last week sent an advisory to banks. They highlighted how certain Chinese money laundering networks are working with Mexican drug cartels. President Trump called on banks to flag customers who fit the profile of those perpetrators, Steph. And U.S. officials last year uncovered such a scheme in which Mexico's Sinaloa cartel was actually working with Chinese underground banking groups based here in the United States. Together, they laundered around $50 million from the sale of fentanyl and other drugs, Steph.
Coming up, President Donald Trump took a major step in the ongoing space race with China and Russia. So why is the race so important?
The Chinese right now have a comprehensive plan for dominance. If we do not do something significantly different than we've been doing, we will lose space and then we lose the Earth. YouTubers known for scam baiting helped federal prosecutors take down a $65 million fraud ring targeting U.S. seniors. Their videos gave the FBI key evidence, leading to arrests and the recovery of millions. And the U.S. is tightening rules to prevent advanced technology from reaching China. Washington is introducing more restrictions on chip-related exports to China. That and more after this break on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump made a major announcement regarding the U.S. Space Command on Tuesday. The move is seen as a significant step in the ongoing space race with Russia and China. NTD's Mario Tsu has more from the White House.
7 years in the making. As you know, this has been going on for a long period of time.
President Trump announcing that U.S. Space Command headquarters will move from Colorado Springs to Huntsville, Alabama.
Huntsville, Alabama, forever to be known from this point forward as Rocket City. Most importantly, this decision will help America defend and dominate the high frontier, as they call it.
This comes after years of partisan battle over the headquarters home. Back in 2021, the Air Force said it preferred Huntsville to Colorado because of its proximity to NASA's space programs and community support for military families. But then in 2023, the Biden administration decided the command would stay in Colorado Springs, which is home to several military bases and the U.S. Air Force Academy.
We created, and I created, a thing called Space Force, so important. You know, we were losing the race in space very badly to China and to Russia. We initially selected Huntsville for the Spacecom headquarters, yet those plans were wrongfully obstructed by the Biden administration.
Reporting from the White House, Mario Tzu, NTD News.
After President Trump's announcement to move the Space Force to Alabama, geopolitical analyst Brandon Weichert weighs in on the growing threats from China.
It's going to get very ugly. If you looked at that Chinese military parade over the last few days, the U.S. is losing space bigly, and the Chinese right now have a comprehensive plan for dominance. If we do not do something significantly different than we've been doing, we will lose space, and then we lose the Earth.
In a Wednesday hearing, Senator Ted Cruz said, quote, "Communist China is not playing by the same rules, and they are aggressively investing resources to dominate space." Federal prosecutors say a group of YouTube creators helped take down a massive Chinese fraud ring that stole more than $65 million from seniors. The scam targeted thousands of victims, some in their 90s, by using fake calls to impersonate so-called government agents or tech support staff.
The victims were tricked into sending money by wire, cash, or even gift cards. Authorities say the operations were run by Chinese nationals working with scam call centers in India. After a coast-to-coast sweep, 25 suspects are now in custody. Investigators have seized millions of dollars along with luxury cars, but here's where it gets unusual. YouTubers known for scam baiting targeted fraudsters, recorded confrontations, and handed the evidence to the FBI. Videos from the channels like Scammer Payback and Trilogy Media help prosecutors identify key suspects. Officials say these videos were crucial in cracking the case and proving that sometimes the internet fights back.
The Trump administration is tightening rules to prevent advanced American technology from reaching China. TSMC, the world's largest contract chip maker, and its factory in China are now targets of the U.S. government.
The US revoked TSMC's fast-track export status for China on Wednesday. Taiwan's TSMC is the world's biggest contract chip manufacturer. It, like rivals Samsung and SK Hynix, have until now had exemptions to sweeping restrictions the US has imposed on chip-related exports to China. TSMC said the privilege will end December 31st. It means shipments of US chip-making tools to its main plant in Nanjing, China after the date will require US export licenses. Washington doesn't want Beijing to benefit too much from its advanced technology. US President Donald Trump's administration has re-examined export controls it thought were too relaxed under President Biden. TSMC said it was evaluating the situation and communicating with the US government. It further added it remains committed to ensuring the uninterrupted operations of TSMC Nanjing. Taiwanese authorities also said they will continue to maintain close communication with the US and TSMC. While shares in SK Hynix and Samsung sank after their exemptions were revoked, TSMC shares were less affected and traded flat on Wednesday.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.